In the late 1800s and early 1900s, industry in American cities was rising. The individual was being devalued and became easy to forget the rights of each person. This was especially apparent in Chicago's Union stockyards. Workers at the stockyards were getting sick easily, they were barely making enough money to support their families, and working conditions were filthy and dangerous. A man named Upton Sinclair Jr. wanted to change that. Born in 1878 in Baltimore, Maryland, Sinclair was not a successful author at first. In 1906, he published The Jungle, an expose of the stockyards, morbidly describing details about the working conditions. It blew up onto the scene and got nationwide recognition, however, not for the reason he had wanted. People noticed how the food was treated, but not how the people were treated. Even though Sinclair's book did not affect America the way he had wanted it to, it led to later labor movements which eventually secured the workers' rights Sinclair had wanted. Sinclair always stood up for those who did not have the power to do so themselves, even if his messages were not always well received. In the late 1800s in America, the rise of industry in developing cities was becoming the American centerpiece. Urban population was growing. From 1860 to 1900, the percentage of Americans living in cities rose from 13% to 40%. The makeup of the industrial workforce was changing as well. Immigrants were flooding into the cities of America. From the years 1900 to 1910, immigrants accounted for over 40% of urban newcomers. For large industrial companies, the influx of immigrants to cities was perfect. They provided cheap labor and they were easily replaceable. Workers were being treated by the employers as machines and were thrown out when they were not in prime shape. If being subject to arbitrary firing wasn't enough, the wages were very low. There was no minimum wage, so employers paid very low prices for workers. Workers' health was also not cared for, and if they got sick, there was no time off, so they were fired. Industrialization brought more money for the businesses and less care for the workers and products. In one of the main industrial cities, Chicago, one industry was rising: meatpacking. Meatpackers slaughtered animals, butchered them, packed the meat, and shipped it throughout America. To people on the outside, the industry seemed harmless, but the workers knew the filth and controversy of the stockyards. Upton Sinclair wrote a book to show the experience of immigrant workers in the stockyards. Sinclair described the quality of meat in this book. Quote, "The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage, in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. There was no place for the men to wash their hands before they ate dinner, so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was to be ladled into the sausage." End quote. If the way the meat was treated wasn't enough, he also described the condition of the workers and their health. Quote, "Let a man so much as scrape his finger pushing a truck in the pickle rooms, and he might have a sore that would put him out of the world. All the joints in his fingers might be eaten by the acid, one by one, of the butchers and floorsmen, the beef boners and trimmers, and all those who use knives. You could scarcely find a person who had the use of his thumb. Time and time again the base of it had been slashed till it was a mere lump of flesh, against which the man pressed the knife to hold it." End quote. These descriptions are from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. The Jungle tells the story of a Lithuanian immigrant, Jurgis, who briefly works at the stockyards before being fired for being mad at his boss for raping his wife. He found the nature of the stockyards to be oppressive. Sinclair wrote The Jungle to show the positive aspects of socialism and the negative aspects of capitalism. Sinclair found a great example of this in the stockyards of Chicago. He traveled to Chicago to learn more about the immigrant experience. He talked to workers about their lives and even toured the factories to learn more. His goal was to simply write the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the labor movement. The labor movement in Chicago had already been started before Sinclair's work. The Hull House, a settlement house made to support immigrants, was established in the late 1800s. Sinclair met with Jane Addams, the founder of the Hull House, to discuss his upcoming book. He began writing Christmas Day, 1904. After trying to find a publisher for his book, Sinclair finally published the book in February 1906. He named it The Jungle because he thought capitalism followed the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest.
Sinclair used the meatpacking industry as an analogy for capitalism as a whole. Capitalism oppresses the poor and unprivileged, just like the big trusts or companies oppress their workers. They had no way out. As soon as the book was published, there was nationwide outrage. The people of America were furious. However, they were not mad for the reasons Sinclair had wanted. People looked at the concrete example of the meat, but they did not recognize the deeper theme of oppression to the weakest and poorest. The people's complaints about the meat they were eating had reached the president. Theodore Roosevelt, the president, called Sinclair in for a meeting about the book. In this meeting, Sinclair brought up the plight of the workers, to which Roosevelt replied, quote, "Mr. Sinclair, I bear no love for those gentlemen, for I ate the meat they canned for the army in Cuba." Roosevelt kept up this bad blood with Sinclair by coining the term Muckraker to describe people who bring controversial things to the attention of society. Eventually, on June 30th of 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Amendment were passed. In these documents, Sinclair is not mentioned once for bringing the condition of the meat to the public attention. Even after that, Sinclair still pushed for change within labor, while Roosevelt told Sinclair's editor, quote, "Tell Sinclair to go home and let me run the country for a while." Sinclair did not get the change he had wanted from the jungle, however he still fought for any change he could get. In response to the public reaction of the book, Sinclair wrote, quote, "I aimed for the public's heart, and by accident I hit in the stomach." After over 111 years since the publication of The Jungle, America has had great change due to Sinclair's book. The easiest example of this to see is in the quality of meat that people enjoy today. Meat is now heavily regulated, and the slightest hint of dangerous materials is beat out as quickly as possible. However, Sinclair's main cause, helping the workers who were trapped in an oppressive and dangerous situation, has been helped tremendously. Workers figured out how to unionize. The workers all joined together to request things from the owner. They had a newfound power in numbers. If they did not get what they wanted, they could all strike. The unions protested for things like minimum wage and time off for sickness. Minimum wage gives workers enough money to realistically feed themselves and their families. Workers can also get time off to heal from injury or sickness without getting fired. Sinclair's book eventually created the change he had originally aspired to create. In Sinclair's career, he did not only take a stand for the industrial workers of America, he took a stand for people or families suffering from alcoholism, and for the people of America who were reading propaganda instead of facts in their newspaper. Sinclair used his platform as a writer to take a stand for those who were oppressed by a larger system and did not have the power to stand for themselves.